Hi, everyone. It's Janice from the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm excited to tell you that my book is now for sale. It's called Divorcing Religion, a memoir and survival handbook. And I'll make sure you have a link in the notes for that. And also, I want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and become a member of my YouTube channel. Take care. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. This episode is part of my series called Strong Women in Secular Spaces. My guest today is Laurie Gaylor, co-founder and co-president of FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Laurie is a third-generation freethinker. She co-founded FFRF with her mother, Ann Gaylor, as a college student in 1976, and today she's co-president of FFRF with her husband, Dan Barker. She's a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Journalism School. In addition to being a longtime women's rights activist, Laurie is an accomplished author. Her book, Woe to the Women, The Bible Tells Me So, was first published by FFRF in 1981. In 1988, FFRF published her second book, Betrayal of Trust, Clergy Abuse of Children, and this was the first book documenting widespread sexual abuse by clergy. Her 1997 anthology, Without Superstition, No Gods, No Masters, is the first collection of the writings of historic and contemporary women freethinkers. Laurie has been plaintiff in or overseen many state church lawsuits and actions by FFRF. Dan Barker and Laurie have both appeared on a variety of TV news shows, including Oprah, O'Reilly, Good Morning America, Univision, CNN, and Fox News segments, CBS Evening News, and ABC World News Tonight. And I'm proud to say that Laurie joined me as a speaker at the inaugural Conference on Religious Trauma in 2021. Welcome, Laurie. It's so nice to see you again.
Thank you very much. So nice to be here.
And you and Dan have been, I'm sure, just busy these last years. And now as America's preparing for the return to office of someone who already made things terribly difficult, I'm sure you guys are even busier at Freedom from Religion Foundation, because if the Project 2025 moves forward, it's only going to be a good deal for white Christian men. Everybody else, it's gonna be really hard on them. People who are not religious, people who are of different religions, certainly women and minorities. Have you guys seen an uptick in concern and interest?
We have seen an uptick in membership. I don't have the data yet, and we're doing a membership drive next week for Cyber Monday and Giving Tuesday. So we hope that will continue. And I should say that Project 2025 isn't good it isn't just that all Christian white men will profit from it. Right. Many Christian men are not Christian nationalists or evangelicals. It's really the white evangelical extremist kind of religion. It's really going to be minority rule. There are very few Americans who embrace Christian nationalism in toto. They're a minority. So it's minority rule, and that's what we're already seeing on the Supreme Court with our extremist Catholic male majority. And that's what America's moving into, is this extremist minority rule. And it's the quiet before the storm. Our legislative team are seeing a whole lot of pre-introductions of bills. They can't introduce them yet, but they're starting to publish them. At the state level, we're seeing a lot of continuing assaults. We just saw Ohio's governor sign this bill that I find very confounding, that you can only use a bathroom that is your sex assigned at gender, but it goes further than that. It goes all the way to college level. And it seems to be ruling out unisex bathrooms. I mean, I'm just very unclear. I mean, many buildings don't have male-female bathrooms, right? I mean, it's just becoming really absurd. And having just come back from the UK, and we've been visiting Europe several times this year for events, this is the norm in many parts of Europe. Even
Yes.
public facilities that are just both men and women, they just look like a typical public lavatory, and men and women go in them. So
Yes.
it's this obsession in the United States with bathrooms is very bizarre, and of course the root is religious.
Absolutely. The repression of anything related to sexuality. And it seems to have fostered this obsession with genitalia. And I'm in Canada, and certainly you go into a restaurant and the bathrooms are unisex, and I mean, nobody's making a fuss. Well, it's just not that big of a deal, but it is a huge flashpoint in the United States where zealous, religionists are kind of staking their claim. And that seems to be, when I look at his run for presidency this time around, was again just very much about trying to enrage and outrage his followers. So much like religion, very feelings based as opposed to rooted in critical thinking at all. It's easy to rile people up and get them afraid of things.
I certainly blame not just Christian nationalism for this election, but I go further. I blame the entrenched religion, this deference to religion that has always been true in the United States, this over deference to religion, and that you must never criticize religion, and it's rude to ask the basic question, is it true? And so if you don't have a ballast for any of your beliefs, then you are very vulnerable to demagogues, to conspiracy theories, QAnon. It's a small step from believing that God created the world in 7 days to believing that Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were eating white people's cats and dogs. I mean, there's some steps in between, but it's that credulity that you don't have to verify the facts.
Right.
Alternate facts are okay. And I think the root cause of that is religion. We have a bumper sticker at FFRF that says religion, the original alternative fact. And I think that this goes deeper than just Christian nationalism.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And then I was someone who was born into a religious family, so indoctrinated from the cradle. And certainly that showed up in my, the people I went to church with, my religious leaders, the friends that I had. Were very much also from families who believed those things. They were taught those same things. And not a big surprise, my identity and my ideology became totally enmeshed with each other. It wasn't just that I believed the Bible, but that I was a Christian. I am a Christian. That was my identity. And so then anyone even trying to pull on the thread of any of my Christian beliefs, I took it so personally as an attack against me. And that's where, we need the space to be able to hold our beliefs apart from us so we can poke at them and pull at them and see if they're valid or not. But when you're right in the thick of it and it's part of your identity, it's almost impossible to do that. It's just very, very hard.
I do have to say, in defense of American voters, that it is important to point out that although for the first time in 3 elections, Trump did win the popular vote, he didn't win a majority. He's under 49%. And all the polls showing that Kamala Harris and Trump were neck and neck really were correct. He does not have a landslide, even though he keeps talking about it. And many people who did vote for him, unfortunately, were voting on this economy issue, which is hard for me to understand how, having tariffs, raising prices is going to help anybody. But again, these are people that I think are generally raised in a religious mindset where you don't confirm the facts first. They're more vulnerable to persuasion. But
Right.
we can say again that a majority of people in the United States actually did not vote for Donald Trump. It's a plurality. So I'm hoping that we all have our minds or our eyes on the midterms in Congress, where often there is a backlash when there's something like this happening, and there was the first Trump term, that where we can kind of have the Democrats regain Congress, or at least one of the branches. We still are a little bit up in the air about the House, and that can make a huge impact. We're hoping, but I think it's going to be a really rough next 2 years, if not next 4 years.
Yes, yes. And I think another potential area where religion impacted the election was the very sadly large number of people who decided to stay home and not vote because of a essentially religious war going on, what's happening between Israel and Gaza. And I really have shied away from talking about that because it's a very upsetting issue for obviously lots of people. But it does come down to religion. That is because these two groups hold opposing religious beliefs. And what's going on is so horrifying that unfortunately, I think a lot of well-meaning people said, well, I'm just not going to vote. But then guess what? It's like you voted for the worst possible person. So I see religion impacting that way. And I also think that a lot of young men have absolutely been conned and played by the right-wing people who are just telling them whatever they're telling them, and they feel threatened and felt like they needed to vote for Trump. And you're a longtime advocate and activist for women and women's rights. How do you see what happened in the election? I mean, women, I feel in some ways women are in more danger now than they have been in the last several years as far as losing rights goes.
Well, I think you're right. Unfortunately, a majority of white women did vote for Trump. But when you look at Gen Z women, there's a real gender gap between the young men and the young women. And this is very concerning. And of course, there's been a lot of concern about disproportionate numbers of young men not going to college. And then they're not going to get as high paying jobs. And then that's going to breed resentment against the young women who are doing better. It's not a great recipe for equality. But we can say that there were 7 ballot initiatives on abortion rights in different states. There were 10 initiatives and 7 of them passed. Unfortunately, the most important one, which was Florida, did not pass, where they have a 6-week ban, which is, you might as well just have a full ban, because most women don't know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. And Florida was the beacon in the whole South. All the other surrounding states, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, these are anti-abortion states, and women were flocking to Florida. It's not just affecting Florida women. And that went into effect in May. And there was such a huge movement to get this referendum passed and so much enthusiasm. But they managed to change the referendum rules so that you had to have 60% of the state vote, and they got 57%. So it's very clearly the ban is against the will of the majority, but that did not pass. But in Missouri, where there was a very draconian ban, it did pass. Missouri is a very conservative state, and yet the state went for Trump. So there were these, I guess, cognitive dissonance. I mean, you can't really make sense of how would they want to vote for women's rights, and yet they voted for Trump. We also saw some other states, very important states like Arizona, pass these. And this is a big movement. There will be more states that are trying to take control, because abortion has been ruled that it is no longer a federal right, but that it's a state issue. But if the Comstock Act, which is part of Project 2025, is deemed to be good law, then it's very unclear that any of these state initiatives will matter. And the Comstock Act dates to 1873, and it's named for Anthony Comstock. And I don't know how much you know about him. He was a fundamentalist Protestant fanatic, total fanatic, who worked with the YMCA, which funded him, and he got Congress to pass this federal law that barred any using of the public mail for obscenity. But he also had indecent articles and abortifacients. So this applies to contraception and abortion. And he was famous for bragging that many people had committed suicide, that he had persecuted and prosecuted. He was empowered by the post office to hunt down people, and he would entrap them. He would order a book or an indecent article from somebody, and then he would go and arrest them. And many of them had long prison sentences, and some of them, rather than go back to prison or some, would kill themselves. And many of them were early freethinkers working for contraceptive rights. I mean, there was, some of it was about pornography or so-called obscenity, but that part lingered. And it was Margaret Sanger, who was prosecuted under Comstock, had to leave the country, who ultimately defeated part of the Comstock Act in 1936. And she took a lawsuit and won, but it was very slow to be enacted. And it was only by the 1970s that contraception was legal in all of the United States. And our own state of Wisconsin, where I am, was the last state in the union to have its law declared unconstitutional. And it was contraception, indecent articles. This is all Comstock language. So the fear is that the Supreme Court, 2 members of the Supreme Court have already said they think it's good law. And these were in asides during oral arguments. And we have the Project 2025. And if they bring back the Comstock Act, it wouldn't just be the mails. People believe it would be any kind of shipping, like FedEx or other private shipping agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And
wow,
they could close the clinics because they wouldn't be able to use to order anything. It wouldn't just be medical abortions, which is one of the things that would be aimed at, that mifepristone, for example. So, that's a huge worry and danger.
No, it absolutely is. And we already know that women are dying as a result of these ridiculous anti-abortion laws that have already gone into effect. And I mean, it's so, religions really, the patriarchy and misogyny is so tied in together. There's such a terrible fear amongst religious fundamentalist men that women would have control of their own bodies. And what shocked me, so before I became a therapist, I worked as a medical transcriptionist or a stenographer for years. And it was always hammered home for us in Canada, the importance of absolute privacy, utter privacy. We were not to ever discuss the reports that we were typing. It was between a doctor and the patient. And so that's a pretty big deal over here. And then we see Roe v. Wade get repealed. And then suddenly women don't even have the right to privacy with their doctor having such conversations. People are allowed to, it seems like tear open the medical record if they are concerned that a woman is seeking an abortion. It's so hard to fathom.
There are a number of legislators who are trying to introduce bills that would invade privacy and that would be able to acquisition information that somebody had come in, was pregnant, for example, or was asking questions. But some states, blue states, Democratic states, have already passed legislation that would protect medical personnel in their state, for example, from being sued or from having to turn over those records if women from other states come to the free states, as I call them. Mm-hmm. And I think there are parallels to the the Fugitive Slave Act, where they would seek to have enslaved people who escaped be brought back to slave states. I mean, it's got similar echoes, and so there are some states that have already made provision for that. Passed New York State, I think Oregon has. I'm pretty sure California has. But yes, it's treating women like property, and we have seen some deaths already documented. I'm sure there have been many more, and especially in Georgia, at least 3 young Black women mothers who had children who should never have died, miscarrying and not getting appropriate treatment. And that, this is what was warned before they overturned the laws, is that it would be criminalizing miscarriage or stillborns. Right. Everybody would be treated with suspicion. And then this whole idea that if there's a so-called fetal heartbeat, even if you have a doomed pregnancy, that you can't abort, you can't save the woman's life, or you have to wait till she's almost dead and then she may die. And this is what we saw in Ireland with a case there with a young Indian Irish dentist who was allowed to die. Savika Halappana, I believe was her name, in Galway, and the whole country was up in arms after that, and then they voted to legalize abortion at least through 12 weeks. But we are such a huge country, a couple of deaths in one state. You don't see that kind of response, unfortunately. Wow. And it comes out, the news is coming out sometimes years after it happens. Right. So it makes it harder to react. But puts the lie to the so-called pro-life movement. What's pro-life about allowing women to die?
Right.
Especially when you have a doomed pregnancy. So what there's no point in waiting. If you can have a pulse or fetal heartbeat, it doesn't make any difference if that pregnancy is doomed.
Right.
The irrationality of it. And that can only be, as you say, religious belief and fervor.
Right. And I mean, I think of the very southern states, or the states that are coming down so hard against a woman's choice or reproductive sovereignty. Doctors will flee. They will flee. There won't be OBGYNs left in those states because they don't want to go to prison. They went into healthcare because they want to help people and save lives. So that's what we'll see if we're not already seeing it. And of course, disproportionately impacted will be poorer women and women of color who don't have the ability to just pack up and go to another state and get the help that they need. I mean, when times are tight financially, you can't even take time off work, let alone go to seek out appropriate medical care.
Yeah, especially rural women. We are seeing a lot of what they call OBGYN deserts, where even the hospitals to deliver, there's nothing in your area. I mean, and this is a broken healthcare system in the United States. And this is just adding to it. And these doctors who are afraid in many states, while we can't understand why they wouldn't treat, for example, in Texas, I can't even remember if it's life imprisonment. We are talking about draconian prison sentences at least 10 years. And they are afraid, and they don't want to live like that. So many of them are uprooting. And so if you're in a liberal city, and of course we have that great divide in the United States that people who live in cities tend to be more liberal and Democrats, people in the rural areas not. So those of us in cities are going to be able to get the care, but it's such a divide. And that's also part of what's breeding resentment in the United States, and unfortunately people voting against their best interests. And I'm reading all these articles where there's a lot of soul searching and a lot of criticism of the Democratic Party, and people are saying you shouldn't even say people are voting against their best interests. But honestly, how can you not say what's true? And we have to figure out how we can reach those individuals better to show that they are voting against their best interests. But this is what has happened. So we've seen the rural areas go for Trump, and yet they're the ones who are going to be abandoned medically and in many other ways.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was horrified by the number of white women, or the proportion, who voted against their own reproductive sovereignty, against adequate health care for their daughters, sisters. It just was shocking to me. And religion really, I think, played a huge part in that. And interestingly, you just participated in a debate in the United Kingdom that had the issue of, well, can women be religious and be feminists? Am I understanding that right? Please tell us a little bit about that.
Feminism is incompatible with religion. And I was one of 4 debaters on my side. These are set up by the students at the Cambridge Union, which is the oldest debating society in the world. Mm-hmm. And then there were 4 on the other side. And it was not a shoo-in, because they had invited a very liberal woman rabbi on the other side, a liberal Mormon woman from the United States who's critical of the Mormon Church, and the bishop, the Anglican bishop, Black woman, who is very well known because she performed the prayer at Harry and Meghan's wedding. and then they had Peter Hitchens, who is Christopher Hitchens' very conservative brother. But so we didn't. Our side wanted to make clear that we weren't saying that you can't be a feminist and be religious, but we did not let religion off the hook. I went into, for my part, I went into a lot of the Bible and what it teaches, and then how it's being utilized today, and that the fact that we have any women clergy is not due to religion and the Bible and what it says. It's due to women complaining. I mean, the credit goes to us humans, not to religion. And Mariam Namazi from Center for the Council for Ex-Muslims of Britain was very poignant. We had a young woman student, Pollyanna, who was a 3rd-generation atheist. And so anyway, we were very pleased that we won that debate. But it was probably by about 80 votes. So it was fairly close. So I think that we did make our point that religion is really feminism's worst enemy. And
I think that's accurate. And I know when I host the conferences on religious trauma, or I've got the upcoming Shameless Sexuality Life After Purity Culture conference coming up, I don't give a platform to religious speakers, no matter how progressive they are, because I feel religion is the problem in both of these instances. And boy, oh boy, do I get it. Do I hear from from people who are religious, but they consider themselves quite progressive. They don't like it. They don't appreciate it at all. But my response to them is, I'm working with people who have been traumatized by religion. I cannot risk re-traumatizing them by having someone who still thinks those views are actually okay. It's too much. They can spend time in church or go to church camps or whatever it is. They've got lots of support. The support I'm offering is specifically for people who have been traumatized and harmed by religion and purity culture teaching. So I really appreciate that you went to that debate and that you kicked some ass. That was just great.
Well, religion has plenty of platforms. They don't need you.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. People don't like it because I was very fundamentalist, and then how a lot of people do it, I moved to being less fundamentalist, more kind of, say Anglican or United Church or whatever kind of thing that had or Unitarian, where it was like more everybody goes to heaven, whatever the thing was, until I eventually got on the other side of all of it and saw I don't need any of this. I don't even need to claim that I'm spiritual. I can I can be fine just the way I am. I'm good without God. I love that bumper sticker. And I don't need to pretend to be anything. I can just be myself, and that's good enough.
Well, here. And, I didn't have to go through any of that. Like Pollyanna in the Cambridge debate, I'm a third generation atheist on my mother's side of the family, raised without religion, but none of us I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s in America, grew up free from religion. It's just a very entrenched throughout everything you do. So it was very easy to see the harm of religion. And the reason my mother and I started the Freedom from Religion Foundation was her early abortion rights activism here in the state of Wisconsin. And she was on a national board. And I was a little middle schooler following her around as this was happening. And we both, it was just so clear that the organized opposition was entirely religious in nature. And we would see the bust-in nuns and priests and school children invading the state capitol every time there was a bill on contraception or abortion, and they would all start their testimony. The Bible says abortion is murder. Of course, it doesn't.
Right.
But so it is very sad to be in this state again, where in many, many states abortion is no longer legal. We went through a year and a half here in the state of Wisconsin where the clinics were closed. And we have a court case going to the state Supreme Court, and a very critical state Supreme Court race also next spring that's going to determine the outcome here in Wisconsin. And it was just awful to see the clinics closed, and some of them haven't reopened. And women were having to go across the border to Illinois or go up to the Twin Cities. And again, what a hardship. Even if you have some means, what a hardship to have to travel and find daycare and come up with pretexts and excuses, but insurmountable for so many people who don't have means, students, poor people, women of color in the state, just grossly unfair. And that causes trauma. That causes its own kind of trauma.
It sure does. I made a note of the Women's Medical Fund. Can you tell us about that? Are you still involved in that?
I'm not on the board anymore, but the Women's Medical Fund was also co-founded. She was the principal founder, my mother, Ann Gaylor, and she answered the phone right up until a couple of months before her death at 88 in 2015. She was the principal administrator, and it has helped well over 30,000 women by that time pay for abortion care. Low-income women, primarily women that were eligible for Medicaid in the United States, meaning you're low income, and then you can get the government to pay for your health care. And they cut off abortion at the federal level in the late 70s, and then in my state of Wisconsin shortly after. So leaving these women with no true way to exercise their rights under Roe versus Wade. And my mother always felt this was the most important thing she had done. Wow. So the Women's Medical Fund continues. And of course, there's many funds around the nation. And they've become ever more important. And an awful lot of them now also have their travel funds. Some just pay for travel. Some do everything. But it's a huge problem. About almost 21 states have either bans or severe restrictions.
Wow. Wow.
And it's, when Trump, you mentioned how white women, and I mentioned how white women voted for Trump against their interests, even though they're pro-choice. Well, Trump kind of prevaricated, equivocated over it during the election, saying, I believe in leaving it up to the states, and you can vote, implying that people can vote on it, as if people have the right to vote on whether someone should have a baby or not. I mean, this is such a violation. But most states, you cannot have referenda, like I've been referring to in Florida and Arizona. Every state's different. They can create their own rules and laws. We do not have a way for the people of Wisconsin to initiate a referendum, for example, it has to come from the legislature, which is Republican. So, the idea that we're all going to have a referendum on this issue is completely phony, but I think that some people fell for it, even though they were pro-choice. And most people in the United States are pro-choice. So there's just a disconnect there. But he kind of fed it. He saw that there was a pushback. He saw it was unpopular, so he started to distance himself from it, even though he was the guy who appointed the last 3 members of the Supreme Court based on their being anti-abortion, and they immediately overturned Roe. And he brags about it to the Christian nationalist groups, but when he's campaigning to a general audience, he was kind of pulling back a little bit.
Yeah.
But there isn't like an easy way for most states to somehow safeguard abortion rights.
Right. Do you think that that there is real potential that birth control could be banned also? Because, watching his appointments to the Supreme Court and even the involvement with the Catholic cult Opus Dei, it's terrifying seeing the people who have, it seems like, seized control of the Supreme Court, and in Canada, as we're watching it unfold and shaking our heads and feeling terrified because whatever happens over there seems to happen over here to a lesser degree. Just very concerned that then what's next? They're going to say that no, women can't use any form of birth control at all. I mean, if this was something that was happening to men, oh my God, the situation would so be different than it is. But because it's about women, I don't know, it seems to be allowed to continue.
Well, the danger, again, is this Comstock Act, which is what it's called, a zombie bill, a zombie law. It's been dormant. It's all these court cases had gradually overturned the obscenity, the contraception. When Roe versus Wade was issued, then it was very clearly dead on abortion. And so what the opposition is arguing is that since the Dobbs decision was overturned, suddenly the abortifacient prohibition in Comstock is alive again. And this is what Alito and Clarence Thomas were saying during oral arguments in the Murphy-Pristone case. And Alito, of course, Samuel Alito, wrote the Dobbs decision. And when he wrote this decision, which was on so many levels, not just the wrong decision, but just such a terrible decision, invoking 16th or 17th century jurists in England, bizarre. Somebody who actually had sentenced Hale, who had actually sentenced 2 women to death for being witches, were being invoked in a Supreme Court decision in the United States. But so he said, this is only going to be on abortion. It doesn't affect other privacy, the right to privacy. And the right to privacy is the Griswold decision, is contraception. And then, of course, the Loving decision of, I can't remember if it's in the mid-60s, on interracial marriage. And, of course, Clarence Thomas is Black, and he's married to a white woman.
Oh.
But Clarence Thomas's dissent was saying, I think that the right to privacy is wrong and it's been wrongly decided. And what he said in his dissent, it was a partial concurrence in Dobbs. He said it should apply to contraception and it should apply to Obergefell, which is the Supreme Court decision okaying same-sex marriage equality. Mm-hmm. So those are the next targets. So it's been clear since the Dobbs decision came down that that's what Clarence Thomas wants. And he was the extremist minority, always a solo dissenter or, considered kind of out there and bizarre. And now everything that he has urged for decades is becoming the ruling precedent in the Supreme Court. So it is very concerning. And there's no question that if they somehow managed to say the Comstock Act is law, the Supreme Court was to approve it, Congress was to approve it, that it would greatly impact or illegalize contraception. And of course, the anti-abortionists, especially the Catholic ones, have always been against certain birth control pills, the IUD, which they falsely have said are abortifacients. They are not abortifacients. But the Supreme Court in the Hobby Lobby ruling, which had to do with allowing the Hobby Lobby Corporation to be exempt from Obamacare's Affordable Care Act, which meant that employers have to cover contraception.
Right.
Women can't be forced to pay out of pocket if they have health care. The Hobby Lobby decision, even before the newest members of the Supreme Court were on, said that Hobby Lobby could, as a corporation, have a religious bent, even though it wasn't a religious group, and be allowed to be exempt from that. And the whole rationale of the Hobby Lobby Corporation, which are these extremist Protestants running it, is that they argued that some forms of contraception were abortifacients, which are not. So the Supreme Court didn't care whether it was true or not. If they had a sincerely held belief that some forms of birth control or the IUD are abortifacients, then that was fine. That, truth didn't matter if you have a sincerely held religious belief. So we've already got the precedent of the Supreme Court saying, I don't care if, you're basing your belief on myth or error. You have the right to do that, and we're going to give you special dispensation. So that's the bent of our Supreme Court, even before the last three were put on. So it's very concerning that, contraception is definitely the target, and we will be resisting, of course, but there's just a religious war, reproductive war right now going on against women's rights.
Right. It's entirely, terrifyingly reminiscent of Handmaid's Tale. I know everybody talks about that book, and it was my privilege to interview Margaret Atwood in January of this year. And now we are even farther along, marching towards Gilead, it seems. And it's just so upsetting, and I want to curl up in a ball and just withdraw from everything because it is so upsetting. But that's the very reason why instead I reached out to you, and I've been reaching out to other women, strong women in secular spaces. What do you think we should be or can be doing? Like, now we're still kind of just watching what's going to happen when he actually gets into office. But I feel like we need to be ready to mobilize, to be strategizing. And FFRF is a huge player in that field of standing up for people's rights.
Well, we have about 40,000 current members. We're hoping to get a lift and grow our group. But a couple of years ago, we started a lobbying arm because we could, after living through Trump, we could see which direction the wind was going. Because FFRF itself cannot criticize or comment on the stances of any candidates for office. As a 501c3 group in the United States, and we're continually tuning in the churches for doing that.
Exactly.
To use tax exempt purposes for anything remotely political. And so we were muzzled. And so we created the FFRF Action Fund, which is a lobbying advocacy arm, which can speak out and which can do 60% of our work is legislative, and we can do up to 40% electoral. So we can do endorsements or anti-endorsements of candidates. And it's still a very new group, but it is what we're going to be focusing a great deal of energy on, to mobilize our members to speak out. And we have action alerts where people can just send an email message easily to their state legislators that are members of Congress. But we're trying to become much more than that, phone calls, in-office visits. It's going to have to be posing legislation, one piece at a time. But we do have the majority with us on basically supporting some basic separation of state and church, supporting marriage equality, supporting abortion rights. Poll after poll shows this. And so we just have to keep mobilizing. and looking into the 2-year midterms, and after that, in 4 years, keep our eyes on the prize.
Yes, for sure. And that's in Canada too. We're really paying attention. I think we're probably going to end up with a federal election sometime soon. And unfortunately, our conservatives are very much like the Republicans in the United States. And certainly there is an element of the whole kind of MAGA / QAnon group. Even in Canada, we of course have folks who subscribe to that, and it's upsetting, it's challenging. It's so much nicer when everyone can get along, but the answer is not for us to just keep our head in the sand and pretend like these things aren't happening. They are happening, and we need to be ready to meet the challenges that arise. I'm so grateful to you and Dan for the work that you do, and for you taking the time to come and talk with me today.
Well, it's so nice to know that we have friends like you in Canada, and that you are thinking about us in the United States. And we're sorry for any influence that the United States has got on your government right now, Janice. And we just have to keep hanging in there. This is pendulum has swung very greatly to the right. It will swing back again, but we are going to have to look out for our rights.
Yeah, I totally agree. And let us support each other as time goes on. So thank you again for joining me. And I'll include any links in the show notes, because I want people to be able to reach out to you. And I love what you were saying about the lobbying, the activism arm that you guys have now at FFRF. I want people to be able to find out that information and to support you, to donate and support you financially. So do you, offhand, what is the website that people should be attending to find out these things?
Well, the Freedom from Religion Foundation's website is FFRF.org. And you can just Google Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Excellent. Okay. And I know people will be doing that as a result of this. So thanks again for joining me. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in today. Please take care, and we'll see you all again soon.